What if the last sound you heard before sleep was the distant bark of a chimpanzee, echoing across a valley older than human memory? There is a corner of southwestern Uganda where the light surrenders before it even reaches the ground, where the canopy above is so densely woven that raindrops travel for minutes before touching the earth below, arriving cold and scattered, as if even water loses its courage on the way down. The Bakiga people named this place Bwindi, meaning the dark and impenetrable place, and they did not exaggerate by a single syllable. This forest has been breathing continuously for more than 25,000 years. It outlasted the Ice Age. It outlasted empires. It outlasted everything the planet has thrown at it, and it is still here, exhaling mist into the cool morning air as if nothing in the universe could possibly threaten it. To enter Bwindi is to immediately understand that you are no longer the most significant thing in the landscape. Bwindi does not limit its generosity to gorillas alone. Its biological inventory reads like a document written by a planet trying to prove something. Over 400 plant species anchor its floor. More than 120 mammal species move through its shadows. Above, in the layered green architecture of the canopy, 350 bird species announce themselves, 23 of which exist nowhere else across the breadth of East Africa. This is not simply a forest. It is the planet's longest-running experiment in abundance. Imagine pressing your ear against the chest of a forest and hearing it breathe. Not metaphorically, literally. The kind of breathing that comes in waves, that rises and falls with the movement of thousands of living things shifting their weight through the trees above. That is the experience of walking into Kibale National Park in western Uganda, a place that has earned its designation as the primate capital of the world, not through marketing, but through sheer biological fact. 13 distinct primate species share this ecosystem, each one occupying its own vertical layer of the forest, each one operating within a social architecture so complex it would take years of study to fully comprehend. But you do not need years. You need only to follow your guide beneath the towering canopy where the branches overhead are laced together by vines as thick as a man's arm. And wait, the chimpanzees find you before you find them. A pant hoot tears through the forest, close enough to feel in your sternum, and then another, and then a full chorus of them, rolling through the trees like thunder that has learned how to laugh. And then you see them. A community of over 1,500 chimpanzees, the largest concentration found in any single protected area in East Africa, moving through their world with a casual intelligence that is genuinely unsettling in the most magnificent way. We share roughly 99% of our DNA with these animals. In Kibale, that number stops being a statistic and starts being a lived experience.
When the rainy season transforms the park, the forest floor erupts in wild orchids, painting the damp earth in colors that seem too vivid to be accidental. The air thickens with fragrance and humidity, and every surface drips with the particular green luminosity of a world that is thoroughly, unapologetically alive. And what if the first thing that greeted your eyes at dawn was a horizon so alive, so violently green, that your brain refused to believe it was real? The Nile is the longest river on the planet, a fact so well known it has almost lost its power to astonish. But there is a place in northern Uganda where the river temporarily abandons its legendary composure and does something that no map or photograph has ever fully communicated. At Murchison Falls, the entire volume of the Nile, all of it, is forced through a gap in the rock face that measures just 7 meters across. There's a park in Uganda that essentially refuses to behave like a single place. Queen Elizabeth National Park straddles the equator and unfolds between two of Africa's Great Lakes, a geographical position so advantageous that it has accumulated ecosystems the way a magnet accumulates iron filings, pulling in diversity from every direction, until the result is something that resists any single description. It has been called a medley of wonders, and the name is not an exaggeration. It is barely adequate. In the Ishasha sector, in the park's southern reach, the lions have developed a habit that exists almost nowhere else on Earth. They
trees. Full-grown lions, animals whose weight and musculature seem architecturally designed for the ground, routinely haul themselves into the branches of fig trees to escape the midday heat, draping their enormous bodies across the limbs with a languid confidence that is deeply, almost comically regal. To look up and find 4 lions watching you from a canopy 6 meters above the ground is to experience a very specific kind of cognitive recalibration. At the park's heart flows the Kazinga Channel, a natural waterway connecting Lake George to Lake Edward, and on its banks, the concentration of wildlife achieves something that approaches the genuinely spectacular. A boat trip along this channel reveals hippos in numbers so dense they form living islands in the shallower sections, their enormous mouths opening in vast yawns that expose tusks of alarming scale.
The park holds one of the densest hippo populations found anywhere on the continent. Above the waterline, the numbers become almost difficult to process. Queen Elizabeth National Park records over 95 mammal species and an extraordinary 600 bird species, the highest count of any protected area in Africa, and the 6th highest recorded anywhere on Earth. The landscape around this biological inventory was further sculpted thousands of years ago by volcanic forces that left behind more than 70 perfectly circular crater lakes, their still surfaces catching the sky and holding it like mirrors scattered across the rolling hills. Named to honor the British monarch's 1954 visit, this park remains the most visited and most beloved of all Uganda's protected landscapes, and it has earned that status through means that have nothing to do with ceremony. In the far northeastern extreme of Uganda, where the borders of South Sudan and Kenya press in from either side, and the modern world simply runs out of momentum and stops, there is a valley that time appears to have treated as optional. Kibale Valley National Park covers over 1,440 square kilometers of landscape that operates entirely on its own terms. Golden savanna stretches toward distances made hazy by heat, broken at intervals by the silhouettes of umbrella acacias that look exactly like the Africa that exists in your imagination, only more so, because this one is real. The permanent water holes that punctuate this landscape function as the valley's living centers, drawing wildlife from across the plains with a gravitational pull that produces spectacles of concentration almost nowhere else in Uganda. Massive buffalo herds, sometimes exceeding 1,000 animals, move across the plains as a single slow, dark tide, the ground trembling faintly beneath their collective weight. Lions lounge across rocky outcrops with the relaxed authority of landlords surveying unchallenged territory. And Kibale holds one of the only populations in Uganda where you might, if the morning light falls favorably and patience does its work, catch the fleeting acceleration of a cheetah, the fastest land animal on Earth, crossing the valley floor in a blur of spotted speed. But Kibale's deepest truth is not written in its animal population. It is written in the manyatas, the fortified circular homesteads of the Karamojong people, whose mud walls and thorn fences dot the landscape around the park's edges. The Karamojong are pastoralists of extraordinary resilience, people who measure prosperity in the language of cattle, and whose traditions have remained coherent against pressures that have dismantled similar cultures elsewhere entirely. The very name of their region, Akarimojong, carries a meaning that is both geographically literal and philosophically resonant. The old men can walk no further. In Kadepo, that phrase does not feel like an ending. It feels like an arrival. This is not a dream your mind invented. Not every extraordinary place announces itself with thunder. Some of Uganda's most remarkable experiences arrive in a whisper, in the early morning stillness of a park that is easy to underestimate and impossible to forget. Lake Mburo National Park rests on metamorphic rocks that geologists date back more than 500 million years, a geological age so vast that human history disappears into it like a single sentence in a library of 10,000 books. This is the only protected area in southern Uganda where plain zebras roam freely, their stark black and white geometry catching the morning light against backgrounds of deep savanna green in a visual effect that the eye never quite stops finding surprising. It is also the exclusive habitat of the impala, an animal so elegant in motion that watching a herd leap and scatter across open ground feels less like wildlife observation and more like watching something deliberately beautiful being performed for reasons that have nothing to do with you. The park's namesake lake sits at the heart of a system of 5 interconnected wetlands, and a morning boat trip across its surface offers the particular quality of experience that only water-level perspectives can provide. Hippos emerge from the mist in prehistoric silhouettes, their grunts rolling across the flat water and disappearing into the reeds. Kingfishers detonate from overhanging branches in flashes of iridescent color too brief and too vivid to quite believe. And beneath all of it, the lake holds its own quiet record. Its waters reach depths of 900 meters, making it the second deepest lake on the entire African continent, a fact that its calm surface gives absolutely no indication of. There are bodies of water in Africa that are simply scenic. And then there is Lake Bunyoni, which operates in an entirely different register altogether. Set within a landscape of steep hillsides, terraced so meticulously by the Bakiga people that travelers have compared the effect to Switzerland relocated to the equator. Bunyoni feels less like a natural feature and more like a collaboration between geology and human ambition that neither party fully planned,
but both somehow perfected. The lake's name translates as the place of many little birds, and the morning hours demonstrate exactly why. As mist lifts from the surface in slow spirals, the calls of waterbirds layer over each other in a sonic landscape that is simultaneously chaotic and deeply calming, the audio equivalent of a forest full of leaves moving in different breezes at once. 29 islands are scattered across Bunyonyi's surface, each one possessing a distinct character. Some home to quiet fishing communities, where generations of families have launched their days before dawn in dugout canoes carved from eucalyptus trunks. Others holding small eco-lodges, where the correct response to the view from the porch is extended, grateful silence. Among these islands sits Akampene, known historically as Punishment Island, a small and now peaceful patch of land that carries a dark legacy. For generations, young women in the community who became pregnant outside of marriage were abandoned on this island as punishment, left to the mercy of the water and the sky. The contrast between that history and the extraordinary beauty that now surrounds Akampene on all sides creates a particular kind of emotional complexity that no amount of scenic photography can capture. Bunyonyi is simultaneously one of Uganda's most beautiful places and one of its most honest about the full spectrum of human experience.
This is Uganda, the country that the naturalist and explorer Sir Frederick Lugard once described as a land so fertile it could feed an entire continent. But Uganda resists every label ever pinned to it. It is not a destination. It is a confrontation. A place where the raw nerve of the earth runs so close to the surface that standing still for even a moment makes you feel the planet's own heartbeat drumming up through the soles of your feet. Most maps represent Lake Victoria as a blue shape in the center of East Africa. And that representation, however geographically accurate, fails entirely to communicate what the lake actually is. Lake Victoria is the world's largest tropical freshwater lake, covering more than 68,000 square kilometers across the territories of Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. It is large enough to generate its own weather systems. Local fishermen who have worked these waters for generations speak with deep respect of the Saranya, the violent storms that materialize without warning and can build waves of 4 meters or more within minutes of clear sky. The lake does not ask permission of anyone. Uganda's claim runs along the northern shore, where towns like Entebbe offer clean beaches and recreational access to waters that feel less like a lake and more like a sea that has simply chosen not to connect to an ocean. Life on these islands moves at a rhythm determined entirely by water and weather and the slow arc of the sun. White sand beaches carry a quality of solitude that coastal Africa rarely offers anymore. The wind in the palm trees and the intermittent call of a kingfisher constitute, on the quietest mornings, the entirety of
of the available soundtrack. Some islands have resisted the pull of mass tourism with enough success that arriving on their shores produces something increasingly rare in the modern world: the genuine sensation of having found somewhere that was not already waiting to be found.
If you've been watching closely, you already noticed something. The ancient Greek scholar Ptolemy described in the 2nd century a range of mountains in the heart of Africa whose glaciers fed the Nile. For more than 1,000 years, European scholars categorized this claim as mythology, a story too dramatic to be believed. They were wrong. The Rwenzori Mountains, the Mountains of the Moon, are not only real, but constitute one of Africa's most disorienting and extraordinary landscapes. A place where trekking begins in equatorial rainforest and ends, after several days of vertical effort, in permanent snow and glacial ice at an elevation exceeding 5,100 meters.
The Rwenzoris were not formed by volcanic activity, as many of Africa's high peaks were. They were thrust upward by the raw tectonic forces associated with the formation of the Great Rift Valley, a process that began approximately 24 million years ago and continues imperceptibly today. Margarita Peak, the range's highest point and the 3rd tallest summit on the continent, sits precisely on the border between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, its upper reaches draped in glaciers that have been accumulating since the last ice age. The journey upward passes through zones of vegetation so distinct from one another that each transition feels like a crossing into a different planet. The rainforest of the lower slopes gives way to a bamboo belt of such density that moving through it requires negotiation rather than simply walking.
Above the bamboo, the moorlands open into a surreal high-altitude landscape populated by giant groundsels and lobelias that grow to heights of 6 meters. Their forms so unusual against the misty sky that they look like something a child imagined rather than something evolution produced. Every surface at this altitude is layered in thick neon green moss, and everything drips continuously with the moisture of clouds that seem to move through the landscape rather than above it. The glaciers themselves are shrinking. Since 1906, they have lost approximately 80% of their mass to climate change, a loss that registers not as a statistic, but as a visible diminishment of something ancient and irreplaceable.
Tucked into the eastern foothills of Mount Elgon, the Sipi Falls do not function as a single dramatic statement. They function as a conversation. 3 separate waterfalls descending through the same volcanic landscape, with enough individuality that each one rewards a separate visit and a separate quality of attention. The largest fall drops 100 meters from a volcanic cliff face, its sound a deep and rhythmic percussion that you feel in your sternum before you consciously register hearing it.
The constant spray from this fall has created its own localized microclimate at the base, where the rock faces are draped in moss of such intense green that the color seems to be generating its own light. When the morning sun aligns correctly with the mist, which it does with enough regularity to be somewhat relied upon rather than merely hoped for, the spray diffracts the light into one or sometimes two simultaneous rainbows that arc across the valley below with a completeness that feels theatrical rather than natural. The name Sipi derives from sep, a wild plant with red flowers that grows throughout the area and which the Sabini people have used for generations as a treatment for fever, a detail that roots the landscape's beauty in something practical and deeply human. The Sabini knowledge of this plant, encoded in the name they gave the falls, represents the kind of cultural information that tends to disappear when the people who carry it are displaced from the places that taught it to them. In 1982, the count of wild rhinos in Uganda reached a number that requires no interpretation: 0. The combination of poaching pressure and the disruptions of civil conflict had erased an animal that had existed in this landscape for millions of years, and it had done so within a human generation. The landscape did not mark the loss in any visible way. The grass continued to grow. The rain continued to fall. The emptiness was invisible to anyone who had not known what had been there before. In 2005, a small number of southern white rhinos were reintroduced to a protected area in the Nakasongola district. The arithmetic of recovery is slow work. Individual animals, individual births, individual seasons of relative safety, accumulating into something that eventually crosses the threshold from critically fragile to cautiously viable. Today, the sanctuary holds more than 30 animals, and the growth of that population represents one of conservation's more instructive recent arguments for what sustained, unglamorous effort can achieve. What makes Ziwa different from the conventional safari experience is the removal of the vehicle as a mediating barrier between visitor and animal. Here, you walk. You move through the same grass that the rhinos are grazing, accompanied by rangers who know each individual animal with a specificity that resembles the way a parent knows a child. The sound of a 2-ton animal cropping grass 3 meters from where you are standing carries a quality of immediacy that no vehicle window preserves. A rhino named Obama, born in 2009 as the first rhino calf born in Uganda in nearly 30 years, has become the sanctuary's most recognized resident. His international parentage, a small, unlikely story within the larger story of an ecosystem attempting to remember what it was before the damage.
Uganda does not end when you leave it. It follows you in the particular way that only places of genuine consequence do, surfacing unexpectedly in quiet moments, making the ordinary world seem briefly insufficient by comparison. To stand on the rim of Murchison Falls and feel the earth tremble beneath you. To meet the gaze of a silverback in the mist of Bwindi. To watch the source of the Nile catch the last copper light of an equatorial evening. These are not experiences that archive themselves tidily in memory. They become part of how you understand what this planet is capable of, what it still holds, and what it still stands to lose. Uganda confronts you with its abundance and its fragility in the same breath. And that combination of extraordinary beauty pressing against extraordinary precarity is what gives a journey here its particular moral weight. You return home carrying something that was not in your luggage when you arrived, a specific and personal understanding of why the wild world matters, delivered not as an argument or a statistic, but as a felt experience that no documentary, however brilliant, has ever quite managed to replicate. Here, the word ordinary has no passport.
The untouched world is still out there. Keep going toward it.